Ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Explorer Chair for the Space Power Advantage Center of Excellence at the Mitchell Institute in Washington, D.C. This is really a special opportunity today to be with you, coming live from Colorado Springs and Peterson Space Force Base to celebrate the 5th anniversary of the United States Space Command. In just 5 short years, this organization has become an indispensable part of our national defense architecture, ensuring that American warfighters and citizens never experience a day without space. The reestablishment of U.S. Space Command as a combatant command in 2019 marked a new era in how we approach space operations and defense. Today, we'll explore the progress made, current priorities, and future objectives of this critical command. And here to help us kick off our discussion is the commander of U.S. Space Command, General Stephen Whiting. General Whiting, it's great to be with you again. And before we get started today with all the questions I have lined up for this great panel, I'd like to offer you an opportunity to make a few opening remarks.
Well, thanks, General Chilton. We really appreciate you and the Mitchell Institute team being here to help us celebrate our 5th anniversary, our 5th birthday. I want to thank Admiral Pennington and Air Commodore Whiteley for joining me here today as well. But you know, 5 years ago, the nation decided that we needed some new organizations to get after defending American and allied interests in space. And that's driven by the threats we see now on orbit. The nation just decided we were not organized properly. And the first of those organizations to be stood up was U.S. Space Command. 5 years ago in the White House Rose Garden, I had the chance to be at that ceremony along with our Deputy Commander now, Lieutenant General Tom James. We were both much younger, had a lot more hair at the time, but incredible opportunity to watch this happen. And 5 years is an interesting amount of time because on the one hand, 2019 doesn't seem that long ago. But as you noted, a lot has happened in the last 5 years, and that's enough time for real meaningful change to occur. So during that time, we've gone from being a ragtag band of about 100 people when Space Command was first stood up to now being a fully operational capable headquarters. It doesn't mean we've got it all figured out, doesn't mean we don't have challenges, but it does mean that our challenges look a lot more like the other combatant commands than the startup we were for the first 4.5 or 5 years. So, that's one of the changes. We now have a Space Force that'll be celebrating its 5th birthday here in December. And each of the other services, the Navy, the Army, and the Marine Corps, they each have a space-focused component now that reports to U.S. Space Command, and they're all getting after space for their requirements as well. So while there's a lot left to do, and part of the last 5 years was really figuring out what more we all have to do collectively to defend our interests in space, boy, we are so much better postured today than we were 5 years ago because of those wise decisions that resulted in U.S. Space Command being 5 years old today.
That's great. Congratulations to you and the whole team. I think I remember when Jay Raymond found out there was going to be a U.S. Space Command, I called him up and to congratulate him. I said, so who's working for you? And he says, me. He says, they gave me a phone, a desk, and a flag. And so it's amazing how much the command has grown over these 5 years. And Admiral Pennington, it's great to have you with us. Chief of Staff, I think, is one of the hardest jobs on any staff because the commander always turns to you to say, go fix things, and then you have to herd all the cats. So it's really good to have you here.
Thank you, sir.
And join us. And Air Commodore Whiteley, it was a special treat to have you here.
Thank you.
As a member of the staff as the J5, so Deputy Director for Policy and Plans, and a great background in command and control, and have been dipped in space just enough to know what needs to be fixed or added to. So great to have both of you here and join us today on this panel. I reflect back to one of my mentors, General Howell Estes, who unfortunately passed away this year. When he was the commander of U.S. Space Command in 1996 to 98, he tried to get the Uniform Command Plan changed to declare space as an area of operations, an AOR, area of responsibility. And it was summarily shot down. He tried and tried, and they wouldn't accept it. And it continued that way until really the command was reestablished. And so we've gone from what was called a functional command to now actually a geographic command with defined areas of operations, 100 kilometers and above, I believe, which is quite large. I think you Indo-PACOM doesn't like that anymore, because your space is much bigger. But how has this shift from just being purely a functional command to both a regional and functional command impacted the staff and impacted the mission set?
Yeah, it's a really fundamental question, and good on General Estes for being so far-sighted.
Yeah.
That was probably 30 plus years ago, or 30 years ago or so. Because it does make a difference. Now let's start with our traditional mission. I like to say we're an ING command and an ED command. We're a supporting command and a support ED command. There is great honor in being a supporting command. When you go to U.S. Transportation Command, General Jackie Van Ovost and her team there, they embody that. They know that their success is only measured by the success of those they're supporting. And we still have many of our missions that are that way for us. We've got to be able to enable the terrestrial warfighting COCOMs and the other COCOMs to be successful, and they rely on space to do that. So that's vital. But we are also a support ID command because, as you noted, we have an AOR now. And sometimes I even fall into the manner of talking about space as if it's a thing instead of a place. We'll talk about, we need that space we need to provide space, we need to do this. Well, space is a physical place, and it has a lot of expanse. And the nation wisely decided that we need an organization that is prepared and postured to lead U.S. military operations in that place. And so in that place, we are the support ID command, and we have to have the right relationships with the other combatant commands so that we can leverage them, because we can't achieve all that we need to do in space without their capabilities as well as our international partners, interagency partners, and others. So it is every day showing up, focusing on supporting others, but also being ready to be supported, and then do that in real time, because it's going to take both for us to be successful.
It's become a two-way street.
Absolutely.
Well, yes. That's a big difference. That's a big difference. Before, it was just an enabling capability, excuse me, to the other commands, but now you rely on them as well.
Yes, sir.
That's great. Air Commodore plans. That's kind of your bailiwick as the J5. It seems to me in the past that there were very few, if any, annexes to regional combatant commands war plans that had space in them now. Has that changed? And if so, what progress are you making in integrating U.S. Space Command plans and planning considerations into the regional combatant command plans?
Okay, so thank you. So I think upfront, absolutely it has changed. And I think we should pay kind of tribute and thank you to our predecessors in this kind of combatant command for establishing the combatant command at the top table of combatant commands. Taking that conversation to the likes of Indo-PACOM and UCOM, and also to the kind of functional commands in terms of what it is this combatant command does, and therefore why we need a plans division, why we need our own named plan, and why we need to kind of integrate with what they're doing. So absolutely, we have both a contingency and a campaign plan, and those plans are socialized and discussed with the other combatant command J5 staff, so they understand what are in those plans, what are the supported requirements that General Whiteley talked about. And I think one of the changes we've probably made over the last 2 or 3 years is just making that language the kind of language that any joint warfighter would understand. So maybe before those annexes were very space kind of detailed in terms of capabilities, but even then not all the capabilities. Didn't really talk about effects you needed, the phasing, how you did that kind of stuff. So as the chairman's made very clear, to do global integrated operations, you need global integrated planning. And we've worked hard with the other J5s in the combatant commands to have those conversations in terms of, here's what our plan does, here's how it impacts your plan, here's the risk and the opportunities that both plans offer, and then just explain how those plans synchronize, where there are requirements to be supporting, and going forward. And we've been able to share those plans with allies and partners, so that they can then build those into their own national plans and understand why they can provide capabilities going forward in there as well.
Very good. And my question, I kind of focused on regionals, but I imagine the functional commands, Cyber Command, Transcom, SOCOM, would also require annexes as well. And how's that going with them?
So the focus has been mainly on the, as you would class it, the classic geographic commands, but we're certainly working with those areas as well. We have General Whiteley's eyes and ears, the joint integrated space teams in the combatant commands, who are there to kind of express what we need as a combatant command and provide General Whiteley back with what those combatant commands need. And for those kind of functional commands, I guess the conversation comes a little bit less naturally than it does to the kind of other combatant commands. But we're starting to explore those in terms of what does that mean? What is the ask on you? What are the timelines? How do we phase it? So earlier days in those combatant commands, but definitely an area of focus for us in the 5.
Yeah, so when I think about the mission of space superiority, which you have, to gain and maintain that, that certainly sounds like an area where you would be the supported combatant command there with your leadership, but needing support from the other services or the regional combatant commands actually that could bring, whether it's electronic warfare, cyber to bear, to gain and maintain superiority. It could be kinetic in nature as well, against ground stations or even satellites for that matter, as we demonstrated in Burnt Frost as a possibility. Are the other combatant commands being responsive to your needs to create space effects necessary for space superiority? And I'll open that up to all of you.
I can say from the conversations we've had with the 5, yes. I think the education bit comes in terms of sequencing and phases. What's maybe phase 1 or phase 2 for us, maybe phase 0 or phase 1 for other combatant commands. So you may be needing to deliver an effect in the space domain prior to you maybe would do in the other domains. The language helps in terms of talking about the effects and the risk. So I'd say yes. Still some work to be done yet, because all combatant commanders like to retain their own toys, and therefore why would you give toys up? So I think yes, but as we exercise through kind of the various tier 1 exercises that we do with the combatant commands, that's helping educate in terms of if you don't deliver this effect in the domain, or you don't prevent a adversary effect in the domain, here's the impact on the plan in your own combatant command going forward.
Right.
If I could just build on that,
please,
two other ways I would highlight this integration. One is in an operational context, combatant commands, as you well know, sir, have targeting boards.
Right.
We do that in collaboration with other combatant commands, and it is not uncommon that in certain scenarios, we and the terrestrial geographic combatant command have the same space-related target sets that we're interested in, because they know how important those target sets are to their fight, and we know how important they are to our fight. And really, it's a collective fight.
Right.
So no surprise. And then additionally, when I am asked to go forward with my unfunded priority list or my integrated priority list, almost always we have other combatant commands and services who have those same items on the top of their list. Because again, it's a shared understanding of why we all need these capabilities to be successful in our various AORs.
That really helps in the requirements process when the combatant command priorities overlap, that's for sure. But Air Commodore, you mentioned something that I hadn't thought of, and that is, and you hear this often, people say, the first shot in the next war will be a shot in space, likely, not a kinetic ground type operation, or perhaps in cyberspace, to maybe break the will of the American armed forces or our leadership, our political leadership. And when you said, what might be really important to you, which would be maybe a phase 2 thing and another combatant command, you need it in phase 0 or phase 1. How's that conversation going with the other commands to make sure that they understand that, before they even start deploying ships and planes and troops, there could be a fight going on that is maybe even decisive to the operation?
I'd say it's twofold really, sir. So one is, us as the combatant command emphasizing the importance of what space delivers to the joint warfighter, and therefore why you need to retain that capability, and why therefore you might need to take an action beforehand that maybe you would do in one of the traditional domains. I think the other aspect is the components within those combatant commands have had a real focus on space themselves as well. And if you go to somewhere like PAC Fleet, they can talk very clearly and in language that makes sense to a number of joint warfighters why they need space to support their scheme of maneuver on the sea as well. So that kind of just development of space expertise across the combatant commands, and then having a combatant command and a service focus on it, really helps just kind of explain those kind of activities in terms of, this is why it's important, this is why you have to mitigate it, and these are the options to do it. Which maybe before just didn't exist or existed in small numbers in the combatant command.
Yeah, Admiral Pennington, are you involved in any of those dialogues? I know a lot of times chief of staff to chief of staff throughout the combatant commands can be a powerful dialogue, but what's your sense of how it's going in this direction?
I think what both General Whiting and Commodore Whiteley said is absolutely on track. One thing that we are, I want to say wrestling with, it's an opportunity for us to understand better, is the idea in this integration in the modern security environment. You may have a scenario where you're talking about a space asset, either one we need to protect or one we might like to neutralize, that has a very important ground segment that is in one AOR that's different from the crisis that you're managing. And then all of that overlaid by the fact that General Whiting and our command have a global responsibility, and many of the capabilities and assets on space are not solely regional. And so, in fact, most of them. And so you have to wrestle with a new dynamic of equity in two different AORs at the same time with potential global implications to escalation. And so ongoing dialogue, very rich for continued thought as this new environment moves forward.
Well, you make a great point, and I always like to say, you know, geography matters in space. Right. And the fact that, you know, you may be in conflict with a adversary in one particular regional area, their vulnerability might be in another combatant command's area of responsibility. And so that's a great point. So you really are having to work across and make sure that should something pop up, say in the Western Pacific, that the other regional combatant commands are ready and able to support the operations necessary to continue our space superiority.
Sure.
Yeah, that's great. Well, General Whiting, this next one I'm going to ask you about. Of course, we all know space is a complex domain, and we're seeing more and more satellites being put up, not only by the United States, but China as well. And then you add to that Russia putting up possibly the capability to put a nuclear weapon in low Earth orbit. What are your, with all that's going on there, what are your top operational challenges that you think about right now, and how are you addressing them?
Yeah, each and every day we wake up and first thing I read when I get up is the intelligence. We're an intelligence-led organization, and we have to understand what threats are now in the domain and in the environment. They are no longer theoretical possibilities that are on the horizon. They are here in the domain, and so now we've got to be prepared for those. So our top two priorities each and every day are, number one is to prepare and posture to maximize our readiness by 2027. And then secondly, to be prepared to counter the threats that we now see in the domain. And so we've got to have the capability to do that, to be able to protect and defend our current constellations. And we also have to have the capabilities needed to help protect the joint force from the space-enabled capabilities of others. You know, other countries are building a very robust space enterprise to enable their Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps equivalent organizations that are trying to use space to hold our terrestrial forces at risk. So I'm advocating for kit to be delivered as fast as possible. And in the meantime, we're advocating to close kill chains. We need the sensors, the requisite sensors to enable the requisite command and control to enable the effectors that can do something. And all of that has to be stitched together in a way that actually works. You know, our acquisition system across all the services, across the entire Department of Defense, does not acquire for kill chains. It acquires for individual sensors, individual C2, individual effectors. So we've got to put the focus on to stitching all of this together. And then we have to have a force that is trained, tested, and ready to operate with the right tactics, techniques, and procedures. And that's about maximizing that combat readiness. So those are two of the ways that each and every day we're trying to address those operational challenges.
Very good. And on the latter point of exercising and training, so at STRATCOM, they have their Global Thunder, Global Lightning. What are your major exercises, and are they making progress? Are you happy with the direction they're heading in?
In fact, we're going to have a chance to test this here in the very near future. We have a series of exercises called Apollo Griffin. So that's our Tier 1 exercises. And we nest those inside a larger framework of joint exercises. So really proud of our J7 team. It is not easy, as you know, to put on one of these Tier 1 exercises. And once you get into the process, then it gets easier. But we've been building that whole infrastructure getting up to FOC. So yes, I'm happy with where we're headed. As you also know, those Tier 1 exercises are really focused on exercising the combatant command headquarters and then down to the component level. So there's great work that also has to be done at the tactical level, and we see the Space Force and the other services getting after that to really have the reps and sets for the operational crews to enable the plans and strategies all the way up the chain. So I think we're making progress, still want to continue to drive that forward.
And will you have NORTHCOM participating and EUCOM and CENTCOM and Indo-PACOM and SOUTHCOM as part of that exercise?
So each exercise has a subset of COCOMs that are playing at different levels. Some will be full up with their headquarters, others will be a response cell. So there's a tiering because they all have their exercise, battle rhythm as well. So we do get their support. It's just tiered based on which of our exercises.
That's great, and that's where you get this opportunity to exercise their plans that you talked about earlier, Air Commodore. I'm going to come back to you again talk about partnerships, and we have great allies, and of course that's one of our greatest strengths in the United States is the wonderful allies we have. And Space Command's, I'm sure, continue to build relationships with our allies, and not only with other governments, but also private industry and international partners. Can you talk at all about any success stories there or progress that's being made in collaboration with whether it be alliances, governments, industry partners, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely, sir. I think the first place I'd start is with the Combined Space Operations Initiative. I think that has been around now for nearly a decade, but that has done a great deal to educate and kind of bring up the level of space awareness in some of our closest allies. It's now at 10 nations, including the US, but that has helped emphasize to those nations why space is important, what kind of changes you might need to make internally to kind of make take the best advantage of space. And some of the challenges in it in terms of some of the policy and intel sharing and information sharing activities. So that has been a great forum for kind of educating our closest allies and continues to do good work with new allies come on board of it. For those that are more operationally capable, Operation Olympic Defender has been a success story. US-led operation opened up to allies in 2019. Currently has US, Australia, Canada, the UK, and invites out to France, Germany, and New Zealand to expand that. And that it really has brought to life, that you can have conversations about allies are important, but actually when you join into a named operation and governments politically commit to that named operation, that makes a huge difference. And it kind of acts as a forcing function then to try and maybe align or ask for policy changes. But those policy changes have to be driven by a why, and what's the benefit and opportunity to do so. And I think it's on us as we go through Operation Olympic Defender to identify those challenges that are preventing us maybe doing more, and then making that argument into the policy world for the changes. But it's not just a case of we need to share more, we need to share more because. I think in terms of some of the commercial activity, the Joint Commercial Operations Cell, which provides us with commercial data, which acts as a great non-classified, there's no classification, but ability to see what's happening on a broader kind of sweep, and then allows us to use our more exquisite sensors for other activity has been a real success story. And the fact that it is commercial data means we can share that with allies and partners. And there are now approaching 20 nations that provide support and actually run some of those joint commercial operations. And then at Vandenberg, the commercial integration cell, some of the kind of closest partners we have in space in terms of just building the awareness of the threat domain, and in terms of how we can better help each other to make sure there are no surprises in space and we don't accidentally do things that we don't want to do. They're the ones that kind of jump out. I think there are still some challenges ahead. I think we as the US, and I say that as a US exchange officer rather than as a Brit, but I think sometimes in the same domains, it's sometimes hard to convince people that the allies bring something new to the game that we don't necessarily do. But if you look at the air domain or look at the other domains, some of the ability for allies to make decisions quickly because of their political and military risk appetite is an area I think we can exploit in this domain, and that's certainly what we're looking to do. Just their ability sometimes to delegate down to the much lower level than we can in the US is a real advantage to us, and I think they're areas we need to kind of look to exploit and take forward.
Right. Well, we get back to geography as well.
Yeah.
I mean, the UK is in the northern latitudes, Australia in the southern latitudes, and some of the other partners you mentioned there, that matters.
It does.
That matters when it comes to space domain awareness and opportunities to create problems for our potential adversaries. I was very impressed by the long list that you detailed there of friends and partners and allies that want to participate. I was Space Command commander. I traveled around trying to get some interest and there was maybe 1 or 2 countries that were interested. And to hear that there's that many involved and wanting to play and support the entire concept of space being maintained as a domain where all can take advantage of it is terrific. That's great news. Right. Well, Admiral Pennington, I'm going to pick on you now because you're the only U.S. Naval officer here. I wish we had an Army officer in here too, and a Marine, but you're going to have to carry all the weight of this question. It's logical that the Space Force be a principal component to U.S. Space Command because of all that they operate in space and the things that they do. But as a supported combatant commander, you would expect the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps to bring capabilities, actually palm for them, spend money on them to support your mission set at U.S. Space Command. How's that going? How are the other services stepping up to invest in capabilities that will support your mission set?
Well, thank you for the question, General, and it's really an important one. When the command stood up, as you know, we did not have components from all of the services, and they quickly got through that. There's a number of hoops you have to jump through, and now we do, in fact, have not only service components from the Army, the Air Force, the Marine Corps, and the Navy, but we also have assigned to us from United States Cyber Command at Joint Force Headquarters, cyber that is dedicated to our equity. And so everybody has leaned forward from that level of the organization to provide a component. But beyond that, what the services have invested in is the development of their force to have a greater understanding of space and therefore be able to serve a greater role in liaison and equity and to enable true multi-domain joint force and coalition force warfare. So as an example, we know that the Army has a long history in space with their FA-40 military occupational specialty, and that has continued even with the stand-up of the Space Force. Many of the assets transferred to the Space Force. That expertise has continued and remains incredibly important to us. For the Air Force, their largest role for us is in our human spaceflight support mission, something that's in the news quite a bit right now and will continue to be and only expand as we go forward. So their ability to use their expertise in air, their operations center to coordinate with the various Navy maritime operations centers on the coast puts us in a fantastic position to satisfy that UCP responsibility. And then in the case of the Marine Corps and the Navy, they both now have military occupational specialties that they are developing. And again, these are folks that I'll speak about the Navy because I know more about it, but the individual has to have served a tour, at least one, and earned a warfare designation, either as on a surface ship, in a submarine, in an aircraft, or one of the other information warfare type activities such as intel or cryptology. And then they may elect to transition into space where they get more focused training on space. Some of it takes place in Space Force assets or assets that are historically Space Force, such as the National Security Space Institute just down the street, and various other activities. And we have many of those folks from both the Marine Corps and the Navy plugged into our staff, as well as the parent service staff. And then as that population continues to grow, they will act as a knowledgeable, credible liaison to the various elements. So again, using the Navy since I know more about that, beginning with the 4-star fleet commanders. And what that allows, just like we saw in an air operations center during our time in the Middle East, when you have a population of folks that are deeply steeped in joint warfare and processes, but have a baseline knowledge of, in that case, air, and in this case, it would be space warfare, it really enables the synergy of the joint force.
That's terrific. That's so important from a personnel and expertise perspective. Let me ask you a little different from a hardware perspective. And I know we can't go into any classified discussions, but we know in our history that the Air Force actually shot a satellite with an F-15. And we know that the Navy actually shot a satellite with an SM-3. And so it's beyond expertise, it's beyond delivering capabilities that help you gain and maintain air superiority, or space superiority, I'm sorry. And so, without going into specifics, is there a demand function from U.S. Space Command that's being heard by the services that if you want us to have space superiority, you actually have to field not just people expertise, but capabilities to help us do that?
That is a fantastic question, and the short answer is yes. And clearly, the Space Force, as our principal partner, first time we've had a service and a combatant command focused in the same AOR, they are going to be our most important relationship as it relates to capability development, and that's just an absolute fact. However, you cannot minimize the contribution of the other services. And when you think about certain things like electronic warfare and stuff like that, imagine the mobility that might come from various platforms, that the other services provide. Also, when you think about the way our space effects are either controlled or produced, there is an enormous need to protect the cyberspace, as well as our adversaries have that same vulnerability. So having forces that can understand the space architecture well enough to be able to produce tools to help us both defend what we need to and possibly exploit enemy vulnerabilities is going to be incredibly important. And so it will remain very important that we have an all joint force effort moving forward, both in terms of personnel expertise and in terms of capability development.
Great, thank you. General White, I'm going to throw this next one at you and talk about future capability requirements. I know you said one of your top priorities right now is being prepared for the 2027 timeframe, but one of my fears is that we'll be so prepared in 2027, nothing will happen. And in 2030, something will happen and we won't have the stuff we needed because we put all that on the back burner to focus on a 2027 deadline. I've heard many people say, well, we're not interested in that technology if it can't be ready by 2027. Well, if the fight isn't until 2035, you're going to be probably in a lot of trouble. So I've been very impressed with the efforts of the Space Force in moving out through the Space Development Agency and bolstering resilience, global communications, missile warnings, the different orbital regimes that we're starting to deploy capabilities into rather than just classically at geosynchronous. Are there other leap ahead technologies that you're thinking about you would like to push the services toward that would help the Space Force and your command in particular when subsequent commanders are sitting in your chair?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mentioned our top two priorities. Number one, prepare and posture. Number two, counter threats. Number three, maximize partnerships, and you kind of asked about that. The fourth one is to make sure we have an enduring military advantage in space, and that is looking beyond 27. While a combatant command's event horizon is typically out to about 3 years, because we're focused on current operations, we do have to be help shape what's coming behind it. To your point, so. Things that we're interested in. You've heard a lot of talk out of U.S. Space Command about something that's been called dynamic space operations or sustained space maneuver or maneuver without regret, all similar terms. We think there really needs to be a focus on not only enabling space capabilities to maneuver in the domain, but also to be sustained for the long haul. Today and really throughout the history of space, we launch satellites and all the consumables they're ever going to have. The most they will ever have is at launch. And then we start measuring, try to measure, it's hard in space, how much fuel's on board. And every time we want to move that satellite, we have a conversation rather than strictly about what's best for the mission. Well, how much fuel is that going to burn? How much life is that going to burn? So we want capabilities that allow us to operate our systems, our satellites, until the mission's complete, not until the fuel that they're launched with runs out. Now, that's not just a potential refueling capability. That's a point solution to a broader point here, but it's about in-domain logistics. It's about thinking that a fight in space could be a long fight, maybe not just a very fast engagement. So how are we going to do that? And if we can do that, that enables some things like maneuver. Today, we operate in LEO, MEO, GEO, and HEO, but there's a lot of expanse. I'm trying not to overuse the word space. There's a lot of expanse in space between traditional LEO out to about 800, 1,000 kilometers, maybe 1,200 kilometers, to where MEO is at about 20,000 kilometers, then out to GEO, 38, 40,000 kilometers. And that's a lot of room for operational surprise because we don't operate in that vast expanse between those traditional orbital belts. If we had capability that could truly maneuver through the domain and wasn't stuck in those kind of traditional orbits, we could really lower the opportunity for traditional surprise because our space competitors know what those gaps are, and they can potentially put things there that we can't get to easily today.
Right. Well, I always used to say, if you want to hide something in space, put it in orbit around the moon because no one's watching.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's even beyond geo, right? You have to start thinking about cislunar.
Absolutely.
Well.
And we have today, working with the Space Force, a unit out at Dahlgren, Virginia, the 19th Space Defense Squadron, that is helping to figure out how do we track things in space or at the moon. And I think over the next decade, as NASA takes us back to the moon, and that's going to be fantastic. As commercial economy goes to the moon and maybe beyond to the asteroids and Mars, we're going to have missions that are no longer Earth-facing here. They're going to be turned away from the Earth, now looking at the moon, now looking beyond, and we're going to need all the technologies that enable that going forward.
That's great. You didn't mention directed energy. Would that be something that you think the force could use in the future?
Yes, and in particular, I'll highlight our Trans-Regional Missile Defense Unified Command Plan responsibility. You know, today, the nation has proved the investments in our missile defenses, integrated air and missile defenses, have really paid off if you go back and look at the April attacks from Iran into Israel. But we're still using very expensive interceptors against a proliferating and getting cheaper quickly set of missile threats here. We've got to pivot that, and I think directed energy could be the one-to-many kind of solution that could make that much more cost-effective, given the scale of the attacks we're now seeing with missiles.
Right. I think it might also, and you can agree or disagree, be an advantage for non-debris creating effects in the domain.
I can see a lot of potential uses for directed energy.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah. I wished I'd had it when I was on active duty. Hey, space is getting more and more congested. There's no doubt. The Chinese are putting up their equivalent of, I guess, the Elon Musk's Starlink system in space, which, you know, we used to worry about thousands of pieces of debris in space. Now we worry about tens of thousands of satellites in space on top of debris issues. And it would seem to me that it'd be beneficial to have dialogue amongst the international countries, whether they're friends or foes in this. We have common interest here. Is there any movement toward dialogue with China with regard to sharing information on space domain awareness for the purposes of safe operations in space?
Yeah, just laying the groundwork for my answer, and I will answer you directly.
Sure.
You know, for decades now, the United States has so cared about the space domain that we have made available the vast majority of the tracking data that we have free for the world. And we do, every day, we screen every active satellite against all that debris, and we provide notifications out to everyone, including the Chinese and the Russians. And people sometimes ask, why do you do that? Well, it's because we don't want satellites to run into pieces of debris and create more debris. And so we think it's really important, and we have a set of responsible behaviors that we follow each and every day. So we provide these notifications to the Chinese. Over the last year, we've seen a couple times that they've given us a few notifications back. Okay. We think that's positive. But we also have just seen the launch of their version of a Helio constellation that left 300 plus pieces of debris on orbit along March 6 Alpha. Less than 2 years ago, they had another one that I think put over 500 pieces of long-lived debris. And in our tenets of responsible behavior, three things would apply here. Number one, that we all should operate with due regard and in a professional manner. Number two, that we should limit the amount of long-lived debris that we have. And then number three, that we communicate and promote safety with other actors in the domain. So I hope next time there's a rocket like that leaves a lot of debris, that it's not our sensors that are the first to detect that, but we're getting communications that help us to understand that, just like we communicate with others.
Were these upper stages that exploded after they did their mission, or was it during the ascent phase that they had it?
Correct. They had already released the satellites at that point. It seems like the mission was overall successful, but then all this debris gets left in orbit.
Gets created. I think we used to have that problem as well, and then we started venting our upper stages, and the Russians started doing the same. So is China not doing that? We don't know.
I don't have those technical details, but we certainly don't want to see that kind of debris.
Coming up there, that's for sure. Well, thank you for that. Air Commodore, we talked we've talked a little bit about counter space capabilities. In your sense, are the allies on board with this? I mean, it took us years, decades actually. You know, I think when Air Force Space Command first stood up, the very first commander said, there's going to be, in fact, you can go back to General Schriever talking about, you know, space will be a warfighting domain someday, and that includes defense and offensive capabilities. And we kind of lived in denial in the United States for a long, long time before we realized that no, you can't just win on defense, which we know is true in any domain. Are the allies there?
So they are, General, and I think you kind of alluded to how they got there quicker probably than maybe the US has, and that has been that whilst they've had people doing space since the kind of late 50s, 60s in most of the nations, they've never really had a cadre of space experts, particularly at the political and Ministry of Defense level. So when they've come into this conversation, they've seen decades of dialogue between US policymakers, US policy, the DoD and space experts having this conversation, and they've learned a lot from those lessons. At times, it does feel like walking into an argument with your parents where you're not quite sure what the genesis of the argument is, because it just makes sense to most of us that it's a domain you have to dominate and protect and, you know, provide counter in that domain. And that's, I think, where some of the advantages the Allies bring to this is, with that very limited space cadre, you're relying on people that are air battle managers, naval officers, army officers, who just have grown up with that kind of belief that they need to be able to dominate and deliver effects in their domain, and therefore if they need to have counter, that's what they do. So absolutely they're on board with that. I think some of the real world lessons that we've seen in Ukraine are kind of helping drive that home as well. But absolutely the Allies are very supportive of the need for counter space. When you hear them speak about where they're going in terms of their capabilities, that's always one of the top capabilities they talk about. I think they see that as a real opportunity where they can add benefit to General Whiting's kind of operations. You know, no commander is ever going to say no to more capability. And we've worked hard with the J8 and our Foreign Disclosure Office to help them understand where there's opportunities where they could invest. And counter space is definitely an area that they all see as very important.
Great. Well, and ultimately, with the correct posturing and capabilities and revelations of those capabilities at the appropriate levels, you can lead to deterrence. You know, so hopefully they don't think of crossing the Rubicon and taking us on in space. So that's great to hear.
And I say again, it goes back to the conversation we had earlier in terms of just some of the Allies' political and military risk to delegate down and therefore to enable maybe fires at a quicker pace than maybe the US can is a benefit to us going forward as a coalition force. It doesn't always need to be the US, it can be allies and partners, and we've seen that in the other domains. I won't say which nation, but I can tell you when we were doing the Libya campaign, it was one of the non-traditional nations, if you want to call it, that was actually delivering the vast majority of weapons into that area.
Great. Well, before we turn to the audience for questions, I want to give you each one last chance to answer the question I forgot to ask you along the way. Anything else you'd like to add here, Commodore?
I think there's one area where we can be an advocate for, and that's, and we've kind of touched on it, which is those policy changes. In terms of driving the ability to share information. I think that's an area that we need to work hard with the allies and partners. And maybe looking at the kind of levels of authorities and delegations and where do they sit? And are they fit for the kind of next campaign going forward? Those exercises will help kind of shape those. The conversations with the allies in terms of how they do it and what risk they hold and how they mitigate that risk is useful. But whilst we can overly focus on the capability side, there's some of those supporting elements that make those capabilities effective that we need to get after as well.
Great, thanks. Admiral?
I think I'd just like to talk about the development of the Joint Force briefly, and just in the time that I've been here, there is a thirst, and it comes from both sides. The folks that have been traditionally space professionals now have an earnest desire to learn as much as they can about the more maneuver forces, because they understand that these domains are inextricably linked now. And on the flip side, you know, folks that are in traditional maneuver forces that have taken everything for granted, as you alluded to in your opening remarks, now understand that they have to have a baseline knowledge. And what we've seen just in the time I've been here, the capstone class comes through, and I know you're familiar with that. In the beginning, I think we were struggling to strike a balance between strategic enough that it was at their level, but enough core space that we didn't lose them, in the details. And just in the 2 years, we've refined our message, and I think have struck a wonderful balance now. But the audience, or the capstone class as they come through, is much more prepared. So you can see the folks that are doing the due diligence, they understand that the necessity to link these things together in a total joint force solution, and it's a fantastic time to be involved in that, here at U.S. Space Command, but in the broader joint force writ large.
Thank you. General Whiting, final word before we go to the Q&A.
Yeah, I'll just highlight what an incredibly exciting time to be involved in the space business. Certainly we're focused on the national defense side, and it's our job to make sure that we're protecting and defending space. But I was only just under 2 years old when Neil Armstrong walked out on the lunar surface. America's going to do that again. Look at what commercial space is doing right now. It's incredible. And we do not think a conflict in space is inevitable, and we want to deter that. We want all of humanity to gain the benefits from space. And I think in my lifetime, I'm going to see somebody walk out onto the Mars surface. And we might see commercial activities at the moon or on asteroids. We're going to see a colony one day at Mars. And we want all of that future to happen. And we want to make sure that no bad actors prevent that from happening. And that's our goal. And we want this exciting space future to be there for all mankind.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you, panelists. And with that, for those who are online, if you have any questions, remember you have to type them in this time. So, and Jennifer Reeves will take those questions. And if you have a question in the audience, if you'll please raise your hand, we'll bring a microphone to you.
Great, sir. I have the first question from
Thanks.
online.
Great, Jim.
Okay, so Lieutenant General Shaw talked this week about the need for better space domain awareness and noted that what Space Command has available now isn't substantially different than what it had 5 years ago. Do you see this as improving in the near to medium term?
Yeah, I appreciate General Shaw. He's so thoughtful, and he's always putting those thoughts into writing, which too few people do, and so really appreciate his comments. We have the best space domain awareness in the world, and we've leveraged that for a long time. But the question is it good enough for the potential operations that we see? And that's why we now at U.S. Space Command talk about do we have the requisite space domain awareness to enable our operations? Do we have the requisite command and control? I think we have some exciting developments that are coming online here in the very near future. The long-range detection radar built up in Alaska will be coming online to provide its its missile defense mission, but it's going to be doing a lot of space domain awareness for us. We've done work or the Space Force is doing work now to develop the Deep Space Advanced Radar capability, DARC, multiple deep space radars that'll go around the world in partnership with our closest allies to deliver that. There's work with the NRO to deliver on-orbit capability to do space domain awareness. We're working better with commercial, so still have work to do, but there are some capabilities coming online in the very near future, and in the next couple of years that'll continue to improve that.
Great. There's no questions in the room. Jen, do we have another one from online?
Oh, we've got plenty, sir. Let's see. Chris Rivera from Sputnik News is asking whether any talks are planned soon with Russian officials about space.
We do not have any talks with Russia planned, and we need Russia to no longer invade its neighboring countries, and I guess that's the answer to that question.
Yeah, you know what's unique though is, and this is not in your domain at all, but somehow in spite of all that, we still have an international space station, and which is a credit to NASA, I think, and the work that they've done to put a bubble around that. So I would hope that Russia would see the errors of their ways and come back to the collection of nations that are interested in not invading their neighbors. So thank you. Anything in the room? Yes, please.
Gentlemen, this is for all of you. Major Boyer-Meter here at SpaceCom. In traditional domains, land, sea, air, we have lines of delineation where people cross. We can say you just went from friendly to enemy. This is the threat. This is not. What's it like operating in a command in a domain that doesn't have the traditional lines of delineation or something like that?
Maybe our former ship's captain operated on the international high seas.
Yeah, there's a lot of analogies. There's similarities.
If I understand your question correctly, it's less about the lines we have in the map for geographic AOR and the fact that much of what we do has a global impact. Do I have that correct? Yes, sir. Yeah, I'll tell you that that is a fantastic question, and one that the department is trying to get after. If you remember the response I had, I think, to the first question I got, this is just a classic example of how do we manage that. So here at the command, we have to consider the fact that many of our capabilities are truly global. And there are some things that can be targeted into a specific AOR, focused, for lack of a better term, but really our effects are global. And so in that case, we have no lines other than the Kármán line. But as it goes to our responsibility to provide service to the joint force, then it becomes a little more complicated. And this is something that the entire department is wrestling with. When the idea that regional conflict, the odds of a more globally linked conflict are higher than they've been in the past, perhaps is the best way to put that. And so we are at the nexus of that the entire time, and it gets into if a theater commander wants to engage in a certain activity, he or she will have to consider the effect and the escalation management of that. And then there is the bleed over. If it is a space effect, will that lead to a larger response in the space AOR, in which our commander has to try to manage? And if it's the case that we find the most vulnerable node or the highest leverage operation is part of the space enabling infrastructure in another AOR, how are we going to work through that and the other combatant command to manage escalation both horizontally and vertically? So the short answer is we have the benefit of not having to consider too much lines on a map because our AOR is in fact global by its very design. But we are very witting to the fact that as the joint force and our national security apparatus moves forward, the discussion that you've highlighted must continue to advance.
Admiral, it seems like a lot of this ground had to be plowed by Cyber Command, who stood up years before US Space Command was reestablished. Are there lessons learned there? Are you guys working closely with Cyber Command to understand some of these difficulties that I'm sure they've had to struggle with as well?
There are, and you've hit it on it. The number of times I've heard, this happened at Cyber Command 10 years ago. I could buy us all around at the bar afterwards. And there certainly are parallels, and as a learning organization, we should leverage them to the maximum extent possible. There are also some key differences in that by its very nature, many cyber effects, whether they be defensive or potentially offensive, have a different level of attribution than something that will take place largely in an AOR that anybody with the capability to observe it will observe it. Right. And so there are some parallels, and I think it also goes to some of the capacity right now too, and that leads to a slightly different calculus with the number of forces, capabilities you could apply in the cyber world as opposed to what we have now as we look to the future. So there are some parallels. We're drawing from them, and Cyber Command has been a fantastic partner in that, in helping us come along. And our relationship with them, as well as them and the Special Operations Command, is one of the important things we're trying to leverage. But there are some key differences as well.
Great interdependencies there too, I imagine, between those three commands.
Absolutely right.
That's great. Yeah, super. Jennifer, do we have another question from our audience?
Oh, yes, sir. We have plenty of questions. One that recently came up was about the Department of Commerce taking on space traffic management. And someone is very interested in knowing where we might be with that, which certainly is being managed, as we can tell, by US Space Command. Sir?
Yeah, Department of Commerce, speaking of fantastic partners, they have brought a ton of energy into their responsibilities under Space Policy Directive 3, I think it is, that says they're going to take on the civil commercial aspects of space situational awareness and provide basic space situational awareness and space traffic management. I will defer to them to give the final answer, but I understand this fall they will achieve IOC with their capability, and then we will. It'll take time, but we will over time hand off to them the parts of space situational awareness that we do today on behalf of commercial entities and academic partners and some civil agency things. Now, we are going to maintain that capability for national defense purposes. So we're going to still be working with foreign partners, militaries. We're going to be working with companies that have a nexus to national defense. We'll be working, to protect and defend all of our items. But they're great partners to take on the civilian aspect, so we can focus on our core military responsibilities.
Very good. Don't see any hands up in the audience here. Oh, we do. Tom, get your microphone right here.
Tom Walker, Lockheed Martin. Sir, with respect to IRAD, so a lot of the companies have a lot of resources that they're looking to help. So just kind of get your thoughts on the status of how can we all maybe better synergies, collaboration. What help? What are you looking for to help?
Yeah, thank you. And we recently published our integrated priority list, which every combatant commander puts out to put a demand signal on the services and the acquisition agencies of what are the capabilities that we believe we need. There's a list of 10 items on that. Some of them are integrated space fires, enhanced space domain awareness, battle space awareness, enhanced command and control, defensive cyber capability. We've talked about cyber. We believe that is our soft underbelly, that it is where we could be held at risk in a way that would be hard for us to attribute. And so we need to continue to harden our existing infrastructure in the cyber domain while building tomorrow's generation of space capabilities with cyber fully baked in. We have trans-regional missile defeat effects on there. Again, how do we pivot from an expensive interceptor against a relatively cheap threat missile to a much more affordable defensive capability that can go against multiple, one-to-many kind of threat missiles. So on that list are I think that's 5 or 6 of them, and then there's several others. But we welcome any investment in those kind of areas.
Great. Thanks. Jen, I think we have time for one more question before we close.
Yes, sir. So several people are asking about space fires. Sir, you had brought up space fires in earlier conversations, and people are very curious as to whether or not you can share more about what space fires entails, what that means.
So, fires is one of the 7 joint functions. And just as Admiral Pennington and Air Commodore Whiteley highlighted, just like in other domains, in the space domain, we need to be able to synchronize and integrate all of the joint functions. And I grabbed my notes because there's about 50 different lists in my head, and I want to make sure I get them all. So the 7 joint functions: fires, sustainment. You heard me talk about sustainment in the domain earlier. Intelligence, we're an intelligence-led organization. Command and control. Space is a team sport. We got to be able to lead teams across organizational and national boundaries with our allies and with the interagency. Protection. Got to protect and defend the capability that you have. Movement and maneuver. I talked about that. We don't want to be confined just with the fuel we launch with. We don't want to be confined to just the traditional orbital regimes. We want to be able to span all of space and maneuver just like we do in all the other domains. And then finally, information. The importance of getting the right information, converting it to knowledge, and being able to make better decisions from it. So when we speak of integrated space fires, it's within the context of having the joint functions available in all the other domains available to us in space as well.
Makes total sense to me. Well, I wanted to give you one last opportunity, although that was a pretty darn good summary of the whole discussion today. Any final thoughts, General Whiting, you'd like to offer the audience before we close out?
I just want to say, thank you again to the Mitchell Institute, sir. Thank you for being here. I appreciate y'all doing a road trip from Washington to come out and help us celebrate our 5th birthday. It's really a privilege to get to serve in this command. I get to serve with outstanding men and women each and every day, uniformed, American, allied, civilians, just an incredible group of people who each and every day show up to ensure that American and allied interests are defended in space. And I hope the American people, understand that we're here and we're on watch for them to make sure that there never is a day without space.
Well, that's great. Well, this has been a terrific panel. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for your participation in this. At Mitchell, we try to educate, and I've learned a ton today, and I hope our audience has as well. And please pass along the Institute's heartiest happy birthday wishes to the men and women of your command. And we certainly appreciate what they do to deter our adversaries and maintain the freedoms that we have and enjoy in this country. And more we're becoming more aware as a nation about just how important the space domain is to that. And so thanks for what you and your team do every day for our great country. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to wrap up our Mitchell Space production for today. I wish you all a great Space Power Day.